Newsmaker Sunday. Breaking down Bitcoin. What is it? Should you own it? Or is it a financial disaster waiting to happen? Everything you ever wanted to know about the cryptocurrency, but were afraid to ask. We'll answer those questions this week on Fox 10 Newsmaker Sunday. Thanks for joining us, and our guest this week is Jeffrey Smith, a professor at ASU, PhD, a guy who knows currencies well, and he admittedly told me moments ago he's learning as we're going on Bitcoin, but you know a lot about it. Thanks for being here. Great to see you.
My pleasure.
When we show Bitcoin, we'll put up some Bitcoin, and this is really this is a Bitcoin ATM, by the way. But there is no physical coin, right? So when we see these graphic representations, this is for our benefit. This lives in the virtual world, doesn't it?
It's entirely electronic, and we're not used to that in the United States because we're used to having dollar bills and coins and doing transactions. But if you really think about it, most of the U.S. currency is also digital, right? So when you go to the bank, your account is represented electronically. They don't have a big pile of dollar bills.
Your credit card's
also electronic as well. So we're sort of used to having digital currency. We just don't think of it that way.
Okay, take me to fifth grade explanation. If you had what would that be, a 10-year-old or something on an airplane, and they said, "What's Bitcoin, Jeffrey?"
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
Well, I would say Bitcoin's a digital currency. The advantage of it is that it's a distributed ledger. And what that simply means is that the record keeping is done sort of globally on the internet. And there's people called miners that are responsible for keeping track of these transactions, making sure the transactions are valid, and providing record keeping of the transactions. And so, instead of having a traditional bank, which sort of keeps track of these transactions, or your credit card, for example, which keeps track of the transactions, it's just a currency that, is tracked on a distributed ledger across the internet.
Totally visible to anyone who wants to look.
It's totally invisible that anyone wants to look, and it's also anonymous in the sense that, it's very hard to track who is undertaking the transactions.
And this has been one of the criticisms of cryptocurrencies, using that as an umbrella term, is that the anonymity, people talk about, they're using it to buy, say, sex trafficking, drugs, weapons, stuff like that. You can't track the money.
That is true, but there are also some other advantages. So, for example, if you live in a country where the government is corrupt, where the legal system is corrupt, or the banking system is corrupt, having that anonymity and being able to store value and protect it from corrupt governments, corrupt legal systems, that's a major advantage of that type of anonymity as well.
Bitcoin is now accepted by over 125,000 merchants worldwide.
Yes.
This is a far wider net of acceptability, I think, than we knew.
Yes, and that is ultimately what's going to determine the value of Bitcoin, is its acceptability at various merchants. And so, that's what underlies the value of the U.S. dollar. People want it in order to conduct transactions. And so if people can also simultaneously use Bitcoin as well, then that's what determines its value.
And Bitcoin, if you do a transaction, there are no ancillary charges to it. You're not paying Chase Bank, right?
Yes.
There's some transaction charges.
There are some transactions.
It's small, though, right, compared to a credit card.
And, of course, as things mature and, become more competitive and more efficient, those fees will, of course, decrease. The other thing I would say, just want to add, too, is if Amazon or Walmart starts taking Bitcoin as a means of exchange, then it's a game changer. All of a sudden it's useful in everyday transactions.
Is that possibly coming?
If that comes, that's a game changer.
Have you heard any rumblings of that?
I have not, but you think Amazon is sort of an innovative company, they may want to get in on that. And so
Tesla takes it.
Microsoft takes it. And so, once you start getting these big retailers and it becomes more common, it's definitely going to have some intrinsic value.
Okay, now Bitcoin was started, and we don't even know if this is true. It's some pseudonym. This guy named Satoshi Nakamoto.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this guy? Is he real?
It's a real person. That's obviously a pseudonym. And, it's just a computer guy that's really good at programming, that started Bitcoin. Not much is really known about him. But, it's like one of these things that's sort of out there now, and, people are starting to use it. And, it's hard to modify. So
Could this be somebody that we know? He's actually a very public figure who's going by this pseudonym.
I guess. I mean, that's total speculation on who the actual person is. Although you might be someone who's very good at programming. And sometimes those guys are.
Why remain anonymous?
That I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, it's an interesting thing. It's
is
kind of quirky and it adds a mystery to all of this.
It does add a mystery. Yeah, I agree with you on that, but I'm not sure why.
Okay, let's go to what's happened with Bitcoin in the past year. If I'm not mistaken, Bitcoin has gone from $800 a Bitcoin in 2017 to 18,000. I think it's retreated a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a jump of 2,100%.
Yes, it's turned out to be good if you got in at the beginning. But what I would say is that it's very hard to determine what the intrinsic value is, what the true value of a Bitcoin is. And we have this idea called kind of the greater fool theory. And what that says is that people start to speculate in things, not because the thing has intrinsic value, but because they're anticipating some other speculator is going to come in down the road and pay an even higher price. And so it's very difficult to determine whether that's the true intrinsic value of Bitcoin, or if it's this greater fool theory at work, where you have speculators hoping that some other speculator is going to come along and buy it at an even higher price. So it's very hard to determine the intrinsic value.
Can you make an analogy between Bitcoin and a commodity play on the market? But the difference, I guess, with a commodity, you're buying coffee and there is actual physical coffee or pork bellies or oranges or whatever it is.
And that's one of the problems, I would say, with the cryptocurrency in general, is there is no backing to it. It just has its own value in exchange. It's just that you can use it for exchange purposes. But if you think about the US dollar or any other foreign currency, none of them are really backed by any commodity or gold or silver or anything like that. And so the value is just determined by its usefulness in exchange.
So when we see this representation on the board of these Bitcoins, it's not real.
It's just a representation.
So if you want to buy Bitcoin, this is something you're going to do with an app on your phone, and you're going to download it, and it will show some type of representation that you own a Bitcoin. If you buy or invest in Bitcoin, the current price today is how much?
About 16,000.
Do you have to buy a single Bitcoin, like a share of stock, for 16,000?
Well, that's one great advantage, is you can buy fractional Bitcoins, and it's divisible into very, very small parts. So you can buy half a Bitcoin, or a tenth of a Bitcoin, or 1/100th of a Bitcoin.
So if you want to throw $2 or $3 grand in and roll the dice, you can.
Yeah, buy 1/8 of a Bitcoin.
But a lot of savvy investors are saying, I would not invest anything you're not willing to lose.
Yeah, because right now there's so much volatility. So you have to be willing to stomach the volatility. Volatility is a good thing and a bad thing. We think of volatility as maybe a bad thing, but volatility just means that it could go way up or it could go way down. And so people are speculating on the volatility.
We heard that, we think of Bitcoin, we've heard a lot about it in this past year. What people may not be aware of and what could affect its value down the line is that there are 1,000 cryptocurrencies floating around out there.
Yes, and so I do liken it to the beginning of the internet, where you had all kinds of companies starting internet websites, pets.com, myspace.com, Napster, all of these old names for the internet companies, and everyone sort of speculated on these internet companies are going to make money, and all of them are pretty much gone at this point. And so that's one of the concerns I have about Bitcoin, is that some other competitor is going to come along with better features, and that's going to diminish the value of Bitcoin. And so maybe Bitcoin is sort of the first one, but people are going to work the kinks out and find better ways of using this technology. And that may ultimately lead to the demise of Bitcoin. You just don't know.
You can, I guess with the American dollar, you can print them infinitely.
That's one of the major advantages of Bitcoin, is that there's only going to be 21 million of them produced.
Now, why is that? They put a cap on it?
Yeah.
From the outset?
Yes, and probably to establish its value, to promise, that the value won't be diminished by newly created Bitcoins, beyond some limit. And so that's definitely one of the advantages, is that, it can't be inflated to no purchasing power.
Right.
Like the US dollar, like you mentioned, right?
We just print money.
Yeah, you want to do a new infrastructure project. Nobody wants to pay taxes. You're not going to go out there and say, let's raise taxes so we can do this stuff. And so they just create the dollars to fund these types of
Just print
projects.
the money.
Right, and that's inflationary.
Bitcoin, again, the limit on it is how much?
21 million.
21 million
But
Bitcoin.
again, remember they're divisible into smaller parts.
Sure.
So.
But 21 million, do you have any idea, or has anyone speculated why that became the figure that they put the cap on?
I do not know that, although it may represent something to the founder.
Right,
Yeah.
lucky number.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is mine, by the way.
Okay.
21. Okay, so Bitcoin, who would the next biggest competitor, would it be
Ethereum?
Ethereum.
Right, and so what you see people doing now is adding features, to make it more attractive. And so Ethereum allows for these things called smart contracts. And so what it allows you to do is contract for maybe borrowing and lending arrangements. Or you could have
A will.
A will, right, so that the contracts are entirely enforceable by the computer system. And so you don't have to worry about enforcement of the contracts. And that's a big problem in financial markets. Because, for example, if you have an options transaction with a second party, another party, and we have to make sure that guy, your counterparty, is going to perform on the contract. And so there's various institutions in place that ensure counterparty risk is eliminated. But we can do away with those institutions if the computer system can eliminate counterparty risk. And so Ethereum may be one step towards eliminating counterparty risk.
So, for instance, if you put your money in Ethereum and said, upon my demise,
Right.
this Ethereum goes to,
Right.
it's ironclad.
It's ironclad, right? So now you don't have legal expenses, contract enforcement expenses, and so that's value creation.
It's value creation, but for governments, it's got to be frightening because the tax implications. If they can't tax this,
That's true, but I would also say that governments would just need to innovate and find other ways of taxing. So you don't necessarily have to tax incomes or tax sales. For example, if you want to use the national park, you could just pay a fee, to use the national park rather than tax people to maintain the national park. So there's other ways that governments can raise money besides income taxation or sales taxation. They just have to innovate.
several governments have outlawed Bitcoin. I think there's 5 currently. Kyrgyzstan, and there's some quirky countries that have said no, we're not going to get involved in this. I suspect this is a real threat, potentially, to government monetary policy.
It is an absolute threat to government monetary policy, and things tend to want to have freedom, and so things are difficult for a government to enforce. That type of ban, it might be very difficult to enforce.
Do we know if this was a U.S. creation, or do we know?
I think it was Japanese.
It was Japanese.
Yeah, but of course, once the technology spreads, there's over 1,000 cryptocurrencies. So I know in Arizona there's Dash, where they're starting another crypto called Dash.
Let me throw, since you mentioned Arizona, I want to read something. This is interesting. An investor alert on virtual currency offerings from the Arizona Corporation Commission. They said that unlike traditional currencies, these alternative investments typically are not backed by tangible assets, are not issued by a government authority, and are maybe subject to little or no regulation. The value of cryptocurrencies is extremely volatile. They are vulnerable to sharp changes in price due to unexpected events or changes in market sentiment. The Corporation Commission is urging investors to avoid investing more than they can afford to lose in these types of risky investments. They put out, the Corporation Commission this week, put out this warning.
The thing is what you start getting in markets sometimes we call it animal spirits.
It's been running Wall Street for years.
Right, and so I think they're trying to protect investors from getting carried away with their emotions. You see it rising from 15,000 to 20,000. Maybe you want to get in, but as I said, we don't know the true intrinsic value, and so some of that is speculative, and someone could lose on their speculation. And I think it's appropriate to maybe warn investors that it is volatile. There's no guarantee.
This is going to sound very elitist, but during the housing bubble, the joke was when the tree trimmer starts. This is not a knock on tree trimmers. Tree trimmers made money in this thing too.
Right.
When the tree trimmer is telling you, I bought a second and third property, people were like, whoa, what's going on here? Because people are buying on the margin and they're leveraging,
Yes.
and this is what led to the problem.
Yes, it is a little bit elitist, I agree. But the idea is that if people who normally don't pay attention to these things are now paying attention to them, maybe the news value is getting people hyped up.
Well, I think it's happening with Bitcoin.
Yes.
Are we seeing this now where people, run-of-the-mill people who were not particularly in tune with Wall Street or investing or 401ks, they're looking at Bitcoin and going, I'm all in.
Well, my story about my teaching assistant in Arizona State University.
This is interesting.
Yes. She comes to my office and she tells me about her Bitcoin profits all the time. And, I'm busy doing my professor job. I don't have time to invest in Bitcoin. And every week she comes in and tells me how much money she's made in the Bitcoin market. And she's definitely made more money in Bitcoin than from being my teaching assistant.
So who should be the professor?
Yeah, who should be the professor, right, So,
well, what is that telling you? I mean, and
right.
You said to her, hey, maybe it's time to sell, or are you just staying out of it?
I stay out of it. I tried to teach her the term house money because she told me she withdrew all her initial investment and now she's just playing with her profits.
Okay.
So I tried to teach her the term, well, you're playing with house money.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful thing. If you're gambling and you've already established that you're not going to lose, there's a lot less stress.
Yeah, so she's out of it with whatever her initial investment is she took out, and she's just playing.
If someone asked you, should I invest in Bitcoin? And we'll take a break after this. If someone said, Jeffrey, what do you think? Should I dive in?
Yes.
I think that it's probably something that may increase in value, but I liken it, as I said, to the beginning of the internet. So if you were an investor in pets.com, you lost everything. If you were an investor in Facebook.com, you made a fortune. It's difficult to determine which cryptocurrencies are going to survive and which ones are going to fail. And, maybe you want to diversify and invest in 4 or 5 different cryptocurrencies, because you just don't know which one is going to succeed. But in general, that market may succeed.
Are there funds now established that give you diversification within
I would certainly suggest that some financial wizard innovate that type of product.
That's a very
you can buy small shares of, 100 different.
Then you're diversified within the fund.
Right. We always recommend
like a mutual fund.
Like a mutual fund. So you participate in that market without taking the individual risk of one particular.
That sounds better to me.
Yes.
The upside may not be there, but the downside may not be either.
Exactly.
Jeffrey Smith, ASU researcher, expert on currencies and on Bitcoin. But as he mentioned, and he's very upfront about it, we're all learning as we go. Back in a minute with more about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency on Newsmaker Zone.